It's really,
Small world.
yeah.
Okay, so Rae is the recipient of the 2019 Golden Bird Prize for Fiction and a whole bunch more. I'm not even gonna go through the list because it's so long. She also got her MFA in creative writing from University of Utah, a BA in art and history. She lives in Brooklyn, as does her sister. And she was or is a competitive gymnast herself.
Well, I don't compete, but I do
You still
gymnastics. I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are those my books? The sound?
Yeah,
Okay,
you,
cool.
I'll give them to you.
Perfect. All right. And you regularly practice at Chelsea Piers. That's very cool. Where she can be found doing back handsprings. And Susannah is the senior editor of the opinion section of the New York Times and is also an author of The Other Side of Impossible, which is about ordinary people with medical challenges. Right? Yeah. Anyway, welcome. And yeah, so we'll talk for about a half hour or so.
Great.
45 minutes, take questions, and then we'll you're welcome to buy a book. And they'll sign books as well.
Now we know why you read a book about a gymnast.
What's that? Isn't that funny? I know. It's true.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody. All night.
It's really nice of you all to come. I know it's.
You're welcome.
I thought we could start, if, I would love to hear from you all about what drew you to the book or what made you want to come listen to Rae tonight. Was there something in particular about the book that sparked your interest or? Not that you read because I bought, but.
Well, we both grew up in the era of Nadia Comaneci, so that was, well, me too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, one of the things was what drew me to even think about this was the same. I grew up and I watched the Soviet gymnasts and Nadia and the Romanian gymnasts when I was young and was completely mesmerized by them. So when I first started working on the novel, it wasn't about, I didn't have it focused on gymnastics, and then I just got so excited about watching the old videos, and I just, so I completely fell in love all over again and wanted to spend more time with that.
That's not where you started.
Yeah, I didn't start. Well, it's funny. I'm not sure if they are young person. I think that setting it in the Soviet Union and particularly setting it in this very isolated, cold place brought yeah.
Could you, since I assume most of you haven't read the book,
from an Arctic town, very far, and her daughter Anya, who is the main character of the book, is 8, and it leads her to the state system of gymnastics, which is an incredibly grueling, all-encompassing program. So there, and then
she leaves home.
Yeah, and her kind of main confidant is an older neighbor who spent 10 years in the Gulag camps. So there's a bit of mystery about her mother, and then we kind of follow Anya through her training as she gets older, and which leads to closer to the national Soviet team. And then the last section of the book, she's an adult and she lives in Brooklyn. So kind of follows her.
Big change somewhere.
Yeah.
One of the most amazing things about the book, I think, is the realism of it. And in fact, Rae did a reading the other night, and there's that woman who just assumed you had been to that town in Russia.
Oh yeah.
It's a real town that Rae writes about. And she just took it for granted that you excused me. How did you get in?
Such a
What?
No, in fact, it's a closed city. You're not allowed to go. So yeah.
But I wondered if you could talk. So the achievement of that the thing that Rae achieves is that, it's that you feel that she's been there and you're there with her. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the extent of the research you did because it's just kind of amazing. You could really bring that so to life.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. I think that, they kind of one of those adages is write a novel only you could write. And I think for me, this brings together a lot of my various, I don't know, interests / obsessions, but I took Russian as a younger person. And so that was way back in my brain. And I had an old Russian teacher who had left Russia when it was still Russia, right at the time of the revolution. And so even though the songs that she taught us, those are in the book. And then I'm really interested in landscapes that are incredibly harsh, and how people live in those landscapes. So I had read about the city of Norilsk, and I had kind of filed that away as something that I was really interested in and would use at some point. And then I started down the rabbit hole of the gymnastics, and then I kind of put them together.
I mean, how many hours would you say you spent watching old gymnastic videos that you called it research?
I'm researching. Yeah, there was a lot. Just hours.
Yeah.
And one of my daughters is a competitive gymnast, and so I would spend a lot of time in the parent area of the gym, just watching the old videos while everyone else was doing gymnastics all around, which was kind of nice. But yeah, I spent hours, and one of the great things to come out of the last, I would probably 10 years, even though the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991 with the internet. And kind of the stuff that has come out are these kind of amazing videos that are both, they have some propaganda films that were made about gymnastics. They have training videos that they've released of these Soviet gymnasts from the 70s, which are amazing to see. And then also all the competitions, which you could watch forever.
Right, but you also did a lot of research about Stalin and the Gulag.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I read a lot of books.
Yeah, I did write. I read a lot of books, and I think with the Soviet Union, you can't. It's hard you can't write about it without bringing in those other elements. You have to write about the Gulag. You have to bring in the Gulag. You have to bring in Stalin, and you have to kind of, in some way. And I think the character of the older woman who was her neighbor, it was a way for me to bring in that history a little more. And then I also it's historical fiction, which I'm not even sure what the parameters of historical fiction are. I tried to make it it is well researched and true to some things. Bring in some historical figures. So Nadia is in it in a couple brief scenes, and some of the real Soviet gymnasts are in it. There's a little Olga Korbut, there's a little there's some, and that was really fun to do. And even a little Stalin. There's a little Stalin in there too. For a cameo.
So these are your two obsessions, gymnastics and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
But this is your fifth novel. So tell us about why is it now that you finally are writing about these two things that you love so much?
I never thought I would use my high school Russian. Never considered it. That seemed a very serendipitous thing when I went down to gymnastics. I don't know why. I think because it just didn't seem the realm of literary fiction to write about gymnastics, because it doesn't, I don't know. I think because generally the girls are very young. Also, there has been so much recently about the Larry Nassar stuff and the stuff about American gymnastics. But I did feel, I'm not sure I could have written about American gymnastics, but for some reason, because it was historical, I could frame it in a certain way. I felt like I could bring it in. Yeah, it's removed, and it's a system that doesn't exist anymore. It's a country that doesn't exist anymore, and so it kind of lent itself more to a fictional landscape, at least in my head.
I mean, one of the things that I thought was that I was struck by when I was reading it, and I think you will be too, is you well, I found I kept, this little girl is working so hard and she's spending however many hours of the day, and her whole life is gymnastics, and I sort of cringe and just, it was so sort of painful, but then then you describe it, actually, it was the thing I'd never considered before, is that she actually loved it. And so like the whole, my own expectations were like, this is a horror. But so I just think it's interesting, and I wonder if that comes from the fact that you actually do gymnastics. I mean, we've watched Olympic gymnastics.
Yeah.
I never once thought like those girls love what they're doing. It's never occurred to me, but I understand that that's a reason that they're there.
Yeah.
But so that's one of the things I learned from the book. It's like, oh, it's actually really fun.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also feel like you can't, that these girls can't reach the heights that they reach unless they feel a drive and a love for it in some level.
Can you talk about what you love about doing gymnastics? So Rae, just so you know, Rae was on her high school gymnastics team and she was pretty good, but she's better now than she was as a high school student. And does, if you know what this means, she does a round off back handspring back tuck.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
Videos that I'll just watch over and over, and I'll send them to you. It's mesmerizing to see somebody, but so talk about what it feels like maybe to do those things, and like what is it that people love about it?
I think that well, for me, it's twofold, partly because I'm old, so it feels kind of amazing that I could still do anything without breaking in half. So that's one thing, but I do think that there is a feeling of when you do something, when you do a skill or a trick in gymnastics, it requires so much of your body to be doing the right thing and your mind to be doing the right thing. And then when you do it and you're actually in the air, it's an amazing feeling. And it's really fun. It is a rush. And if you land it, and in the book, there's a scene where she has been, she has this kind of cruel coach, and she's been working on this triple twist forever and can't do it. And then when she does it, she owns that moment. And for her, she says, you'll never know, in her head, you'll never know what that feels like. And I think there is that feeling of accomplishment in a way that's purely physical, and also gets to, everything kind of has to work together. So I think I do think it's a rush. I think it feels like you've done something that's out of the realm of normal.
Right. I mean, do you feel like you understand now, when you look at somebody do something like an old video now, do you feel like you have a good understanding of how that's possible?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly why I could write the book. I don't think I could have baked it very well, because I do think it's hard. It's hard to talk about what things are in gymnastics, and it's hard to understand what is required of doing those skills. That's part of the reason I think when I kind of came back to gymnastics in my 40s to be able to watch the videos of, Nadia, her actual skill level is nothing compared to what skills are today. She's incredibly beautiful to watch and had her own style and really elegant lines, and but the actual athleticism has moved so far that it's much easier to kind of understand, for me at least, how Nadia does things, because it's not, obviously I can't do them, but it's not so far out of my realm. Whereas now what women are doing, girls and women are doing, is really just beyond comprehension. But it was also different in the 70s. They didn't have springboard floors. They had actual piano accompanist on the side of the floor. So it was different.
So when you're watching now, I mean, you from all the research you've done, and and this is obviously part of your book, how brutal it is to become an elite gymnast, or to become a gymnast at that level. So is it hard? Can you talk about loving something or appreciating something that is when the sort of awful stuff that goes into it. Like watching concussions in football. How
Right.
can you appreciate it? Yeah.
Totally. And in the character of Anya, I still want her to do well in gymnastics. Like I want her to win, even though I know the toll that it takes.
Yeah, there was a great line actually in the Times Review. By the way, treat yourself to the Times Review of Rae's book, which is in this Sunday.
I think it's in the Sunday.
Subscription, if you just do nytimes.com, Rae Meadows, you'll come up. But there's a line in the review, it was a really lovely review. They called the book gem-like. But the line that really resonated for me in the review was, we long for Anya's success even as it imperils her, which was so,
Yeah.
so I wonder if you could explain that, because I felt that too. I wanted her to
Yeah,
do well,
which
even
is
though it
so-
was just sort of
Right.
kind of crushing also. And so
Yeah.
talk about that. Why do we want her to succeed when it imperils her?
I think that there is still some even though I know how things will turn out, there is a sliver of hope that if in doing well, she feels a certain thing or gets some reward for what she's put into it. But it's a hard thing. I mean, with my daughter Olive, who has had a ton of injuries and has to, she's in the gym 25 hours a week. It's a lot, and it's a lot to watch your child kind of grapple with these things. Well, I also love watching her do gymnastics, and she loves doing it. But it's also, love is a hard one, because I think in the same way with Anya, when it's your life and you don't have that's been your life for so long, it just becomes part of your DNA almost. And so the love is there, but I also think it's tied to ideas of self and all that. And I think in the case of Anya, who lives in a system that is where you're not allowed to have self-differentiation, the rules are all kind of forced upon you, but she can carve out a little bit in the way that she does gymnastics, and the effort that she puts in, and the kind of drive to be really good. But I think it's tough, and I think that's right. I think that the football is an apt comparison, because the physical that goes into it. And I see elite gymnasts now, and I know what goes into it, and it is debilitating. These kids come out and 20-year-olds with a lot of arthritis and other things, and it can be really brutal on the body. But I think in the way of narrative and reading novels, you still kind of root for success, even if that success is kind of not. I don't know. It's hard to think like, oh, maybe she'll
define success, I guess.
Yeah. But it is really tricky. I think, but that's part of the reason I could having it be historical, and the Soviet Union, which no longer exists, and that these gymnasts who are now in their 40s and 50s, it was almost easier to kind of see the system that doesn't exist and look at it through that lens, as opposed to looking at something today that I know China is probably the only country that still maintains that sort of system. That's the state. Yeah. They're basically drafted very young, and you don't really know what happens in the Chinese gymnastic state, but I imagine it's incredibly brutal. But they are also beautiful, and I do see a lot of art in gymnastics, and so I don't know if the gymnasts themselves see it that way, but
you can hold both in your head, of this artistry and also the
I
brutality
can,
of
which
it.
is maybe it's just a bit of human nature that I probably shouldn't be able to, but I'm still drawn to that kind of seeing what and I think in the book, there's a lot of body being pushed to the limit, whether it's Vera in the camps or Anya being pushed. So you kind of see both the beauty of what can come of it, and also the degradation that could come from it.
I think that's what the strength of it is, that nothing is settled or resolved. You read the book and you don't know really how you're supposed to think about
Yeah.
things, which I think is its great strength and rare in a lot of books.
Oh, well, thank
It's,
you. I think it's hard in sports, using sports.
Right,
to-
because sports is you win and it's a happy
You win.
story.
Yeah, you're used to the
But she,
of
but when
sports.
she, yeah, but it's more complicated.
Yeah.
In your telling.
Yeah,
One thing, I learned also was the extent of how. Abusive it could be. Talk a little bit about, Elena, the friend. Well, first of all, so Anya goes away when she's 8 and she's living in a dorm.
yeah,
right?
or
And
she lives at home, but she doesn't see her father, like she's there for all day. Well, when she's 12, she.
Oh,
lives
when
away.
she's
Yeah,
12, she lives
Yeah,
away, right? So
Yeah.
then, and then she becomes her friends are the other gymnasts.
Yeah,
Friends. Or
yeah.
frenemies,
Yeah.
but then, so talk about her close friend Elena.
Yeah, so the character of Elena, it's based on a real gymnast. I don't know if you remember this gymnast, Elena Mukina, who was, she was the gold medal all around winner in 1978 in the World Championships. And the 1980 Olympics, which were held in Moscow, the ones where the US boycotted. The Soviet team had won at that point 7 consecutive team gold medals, so that it was not up for debate whether they would win in Moscow. You know, that was huge. And Elena Mukina was going to be the grounder of that team, and she was being pushed really hard. She had an injury and they were pushing her to come back, and she couldn't do the skills that she had been doing, and so they put in this skill to kind of make her routine more flashy that women hadn't done. It had only been done in men's gymnastics. It's a crazy skill. If you can watch old videos of people doing it. It's basically like a back 1.5 flip with 1.5 twist, and then you land in a forward roll. So you're landing on your head, basically you're landing on your neck and your head. 2 weeks before the Olympics, she broke her neck in 3 places doing this skill. And then it was covered up by the Soviet Union. She was a complete cover up, a complete campaign of misinformation and basically to make her disappear before the Olympics. And then her story didn't really fully come out until the Soviet Union fell, and she gave a few interviews. She died about 15 years ago. But so I use that story as a basis for Anya's friend Elena, and who she meets at the kind of National Training Center. And she's kind of the example of taken that far, what happens, how to. And Elena Mukina said once in an interview that her coach had said they won't let you go until you break, and that's basically what happened. And I think that she was an incredibly beautiful gymnast. She was really graceful and had 3 skills that were named after her at the time, that she was the first person to do. She has one of those very sad Soviet faces, that you're probably seen a million times. Never smiled, just was. And I think she was someone who probably didn't have as much of the love or drive. She was pushed so hard. She had natural talent, but probably I would have guessed, burned out eventually, because she just seemed like a sad kid.
When you learn about all these people and do all the research, and then you have to think about what you want your characters to believe. And does it change? Did it change your opinions at all about gymnastics or Soviet Union? Like, did you learn things about how you felt about things? Because you had to really think through,
Right.
what, like, how Anya was gonna feel about gymnastics, or how, what.
Yeah. It definitely changed the way. I mean, my kind of one memory of being a kid and watching the Soviet gymnasts was just like, to me as a child, it was a given that they were the best. I never even thought about, them and the Romanians, but they never even considered that anyone else, was in that same category. And I just kind of assumed they were serious and they did this thing, and I didn't really think about what went into it. So certainly learning about the brutality of it changed. There's one film that I watched, or a piece of film that was taken in in the training center of Elena Mapina and her coach when she's coming back from an injury and we're trying to make her do these things. It's actually kind of amazing that it exists because it's so antithetical to the Soviet ethos to show she falls on, she lands on her knees again and again and again doing these things, and she just looks terrible. She looks so sad. Her coach is mad. And you see these things that they it doesn't fit with the kind of mythological hero narrative that they wanted to portray. So that definitely made me think of the girls as more vulnerable than I would have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're also a mother now.
Yeah, for sure. And I think having a daughter, a young daughter who does, she's 12 now, but even at the age of 8, allowed me to kind of understand a little bit of how there could be this mix of love and not considering anything else, any other option, and also understand kind of what that is for the body. All of that.
This is changing topics a little bit, but this is the first mystery you've written, right? Well, first, so walk us through what your other books are about.
So the book before this was took place in the Dust Bowl. It's called I Will Send Rain, and it was it's, to me, it's not dissimilar in that this is this incredible bleak inhospitable landscape, and as is this. So it's a different one, but I like the idea of that as a backdrop to regular human drama and human interaction.
I'm just gonna stop you right there
Yeah.
because it made me think of something else, which is you've talked about how you're interested in how human beings can learn to survive anything, which
Yeah.
is something you obviously it's a major theme
Yeah.
in this book. Do you think all human beings, or because I sort of feel like I don't think I could survive that.
Well, this is slightly off topic, but I read a book that and I'm forgetting the title. It was about the Donner Party, and it was so unbelievable. And to be honest, it's the women who survive and the women who make it through. And I don't think
It doesn't want
it
to
doesn't
anyone.
care. And there's something about that also plays into it. And in her neighbor Vera is the one who survives. The rest of her family does not survive in the camp. And I think that there is a mental strength there that comes into play. So I don't know if it's all human beings, it's just women survive. But I do find it interesting. I do think that in reading about the experiences of people in the Gulag, the ways that they learned to adapt, I find fascinating. I was reading this one story about a woman who said, we just found ways to keep us feeling human. So whether that was braiding our hair when it long enough, or putting some like sewing a pocket in their kind of, they were all called the same thing and there were no differentiation. So they would find ways to differentiate. What's that?
We're non-people.
Yes, yeah.
Well, and then the town itself that she comes from, which is Brianna Rills.
Yeah,
Um,
and there's darkness for many months, complete darkness. Yeah, it is, if not the most, one of the most polluted places on earth. It is,
say mine,
they mine,
and
they mine nickel, copper, and I think cadmium.
and the air is polluted from what?
The mining operation, everything is, so the river is, everything is dead, so there's no, the forest is dead, the river is dead. And it's just, you'll never get an accurate, kind of understanding of the health issues, but they're incredible health issues, right? As you might imagine.
Right.
And it was a town that was made by forced labor, so they just were sent and had to kind of create this place.
I mean, she's painting a really dark picture, but the thing that, to me, that makes the novel so good is that you're not relentless about it, like you throw us some bones, there really there's a lot of lightness and love, and you sort of are carried through by that, I think. And I think also like our own love for Anya, I think it's a mystery, as we mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Somebody said,
Yeah.
but I think for me, the thing that kind of is so propulsive about it is you care about this little girl so much, so you just have, you want to find out what happens to her.
Yeah.
And so it's not as
Right. I mean, it's
not as bleak as you might think.
Yeah, I think even as writing the characters, I want some lightness for them. And I think the relationship, particularly of Anya and Elena, is a real source of that. I think that they have this relationship that for both of them is their first real friendship, first love. And they're able to kind of find it in the midst of all this gray darkness that they have kind of found each other in a way.
So what made you want to do, so we were talking about your book, which was, so I Will Send Rain.
Yeah.
And the one before that.
Was Mercy Train, which was about it included a story about the orphan train of kids and before that,
When kids were sent
Oh,
out of the
yes.
city to be adopted in the country.
yeah, just by whoever showed up
Foster.
at the station.
Yeah,
Yeah,
orphans.
yeah.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
what was before that?
And then before that was No One Tells Everything, which is a very dark book, kind of a dark murder thing. And then my first book was called Calling Out, which is about an escort service in Salt Lake City.
My mom read it, she said, "Rae said, me Brooks."
And what did you answer?
No, I'm sure that she did not. Did I ever tell you, she said,
No, that's really fun. No, as a grad student in Salt Lake City, I answered phones for an escort service.
you were, you were.
So you can, yeah, I took the,
Basic.
yes, so I did.
What's that for, just for research kind of, or no?
I mean, I took a lot of notes. So
Yeah.
when I first took the job, I didn't know what it was. It was back in the day of like classified ads. And I was like, I'm a grad student. I need, phone answering. And yes, I did it for a while. And I guess years later got an awful lot of it. Yeah.
If we.
Well,
there's
so
time for
If,
questions.
if people want to, this is a great conversation. So I just wanted to check in and see if anybody did have any questions. Either one would be happy to answer. And if not, you guys can keep going. We have plenty of time, so.
It's so nice of you all to come. It's lovely.
I was just gonna make a comment. I've read, I Will Send Rain. It does through the whole book. Well, but I think when you say that this book describes the climate, I'm sure it does, because having read that, it is.
Oh, that's so nice.
Awful to read.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I know it is bleak. There is some of that, I think. Some of the things of researching living in this type of environment where it's so cold, they can't. Within seconds, things freeze. And so you can't open your mouth. You can't, all these things that you kind of have to live with.
If you open your, like,
Well,
what
I think it's because it hurts your teeth so much and they can freeze and your eyelashes freeze. Yeah, it really freezes. And so I just think it feels terrible. But people, I mean, 175,000 people still live there. Yeah. And they go.
And is it closed?
It's closed, so you need permission from permission from the
So
Russian government to
they're
go.
really prisoners in the city.
Yeah, I mean, they can probably, I think supposedly they get paid better. People go there to take these jobs because they get paid better than they would.
So what are they gonna do with it?
Right, so then they're stuck living there, but then it's kind of that cycle. And one of the things that some incredibly haunting photos of the people, and they're recent. They're from I think 2010, 2011. And that for me was just so great. I mean, just so good for me as a writer to see those photos.
Yeah.
Where I kind of got the
Have you been
feeling.
to Russia?
No.
Well, I have. Everybody else been to Russia? You talk about how awful the environment looks. There's a town outside of St. Petersburg that provides the power to the St. Petersburg. And all the piping is above ground. So you walk around, there's houses, and here you are, these big pipes. I mean, it is the most depressing
Yeah,
thing in the world.
yeah,
And so I can imagine what this must look like. And
Yeah.
And this is, and I was there, well, the height of goodness with Russia was in 2007.
yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that one of the things that certainly during the Soviet times and even now in Russia, there's a huge disparity between the economic disparity. The country is so underdeveloped, like it's an underdeveloped nation. I mean, it's a very different thing than what you see in Moscow or St. Petersburg. I mean, it's incredible. There's a lot of poverty and a lot of
Every place you'd stop, we went by river between the two cities, there would be these old women in the spring or selling daffodils.
yes, yes,
And 5 daffodils for a ruble,
Yes.
which is a quarter.
yeah.
It was awful, you wanted to buy all of them.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that during the, with Stalin and for the years after, there was a real push to kind of show the developed part of Russia, while the other part was just, I mean, it was like it was, back, 50 years. Yeah.
So I'm Lori, and yeah, oh no, I'm thrilled. I'm so glad I was able to make it
So
maybe
great.
here from the other event. But I also read I Will Send Rain, and I agree with you. Like I feel that you were eating the dust the entire time. But I will say that I, sort of experiences is like I don't read a lot of Russian books, but like in Disappearing Earth,
Yes.
and even
And I don't, I'm not an outliner. I know the beginning and end and kind of.
Oh, you do know the end, though.
I do know that.
Interesting.
Yeah, and kind of move toward that end, and not to say, and I don't really know, sometimes some things are serendipitous, like the poet who is in this book, Marina Tsvetaeva. I didn't know that she was connected to the Gulag, and then I was able to kind of pull that in with the other character, and those are just like happy accidents that happen along the way.
Interesting.
How long did it take to write the book?
I don't know.
No time at all.
No.
And it took real long.
No, I think about 2 years, and it took a long time to actually, with COVID and everything else, the publishing world was, it was all over the place, so.
So I have another question. So based on, you said you do the beginning and the end. When you read a book, do you ever read the end, or for anybody, do you ever read the end first?
I know, I don't, but there's a woman that I know who does that. Who was at my reading
A lot of
yesterday.
people do it.
Oh, they do.
And I can never, like sometimes I have to cover the other page because I want, I don't want to.
Stray over and see.
But you know the beginning and the end, but you don't do that when you read, which is, I
No.
wasn't sure if it carried.
That's so funny. Yeah, I don't. And I remember Susannah's husband is a novelist, and when I met him 20 years ago, he was already a published novelist, and I was just coming out of getting my MFA, and I went to his apartment, and his whole wall was note cards, mapping something out, and I just. You do have to kind of figure out your own. It took me a while to kind of accept that I'm never gonna be that kind of planner, but yeah.
I can't remember if Lori, your comment about not wanting to know, I was so carried away with Anya and felt so maternal about her. I can't remember if I actually did this, but did I call you at some point and say, please tell me nothing happened?
Yeah.
You can do it,
Yeah.
it's your sister.
Yeah, this is from my last book. I did a class at the University of Iowa, just an undergraduate creative writing class, and they had read the book, and this kid came up to me after, and he's like, I'm so mad at you for killing that, for having that character die. So sweet, but it was such a nice way. I think we all read novels, or hopefully, and so feel that they are real characters.
I'm curious about the research of the Soviet Union versus Russia. And
Oh,
like,
yeah.
if you had access, I mean, did you have different access to information and like how you had to change your mindset? Just because it used to be so closed.
It's so closed, and now you can get so much stuff. And there's a couple books, like, that woman, Svetlana Alexievich, she wrote those, the secondhand time. She's amazing, and that the book Secondhand Time, it's kind of like about the end of the Soviet Union, and you get a lot of voices in there. I think it's actually really interesting to look at Russia now versus the Soviet Union, because there's a real continuum. It's really, certainly with Putin, it's just not all that, I mean, it's different, but not all that different. And so, and to kind of see these things returning in a way, I think there is even though it was 30 years ago, I think there's a bit of a cultural memory to what life was like in the Soviet Union, and kind of the acceptance of those kind of rules and restrictions. And I would love to go to Russia. I have not been, but
It seems like you got a lot of information.
I
though.
did get a lot of information. Yeah, and you can get stuff. And my Russian is not great, but at least I have a sense of it, and so that was also helpful, even in just kind of hearing it, or I don't know how that comes in. So it's not like I was really reading in Russian, but I have enough sense of it to kind of get the gist sometimes, and that was helpful.
Does anybody else have a question? Because I do, I have like 10. Did you read the So one of my other questions, why did you study Russian as a child? Like, what prompted that? And then my related question is, so both of you are so incredibly accomplished, like New York Times, and like you have like 48 awards and as a writer. And so like, was there something like growing up, or was there something in the water? I mean, like, to what do you attribute both of you sort of, whether it's journalism or literature, but wanting to share words with the world? I'm just intrigued by that.
I mean, Susannah was definitely into it before I was. I was kind of a late bloomer.
I think of what we do as being very different, because I was first most of my career, I've been a reporter, so it just feels really different.
Yeah, but I do think that having an awareness, I think both having Susannah and her husband, who's a novelist, to me was a bit of a model, because I didn't, I studied art history. I didn't do writing until I was in my later 20s, and I kind of thought maybe I love the idea of it. I was a big reader, but I didn't know that was something that I could do. But yeah, I think it's been really nice to have, I mean, they are also, both Susannah and her husband, like very, I don't know, seem kind of more connected in the writing world, I think, than I ever feel like I am. So it's a good sounding board for stuff.
In terms of what was in the water, Ray's
Oh,
a
yeah.
couple years older than I am. I was just trying to keep up with Ray. I did do as well as Ray did and everything.
I had to take Russian to go to the public high school that I went to. I had to. It was like one of the things they oddly offered. And so if you said, oh, I just have to take Russian, and I could go to this high school. so I
That's
took 4 years of
hilarious.
Russian.
Smart, very,
Yeah.
very smart.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone, so.
Yeah,
much.
thank you so much.
This is
So
really
we
motivating.
have copies of the book at this register here, and Rae would be happy to sign them for you, and you're welcome to stay and chat for a bit if you'd like as well. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it.